Our next item is item I1. Under resolutions, to discuss and adopt a resolution declaring the city's intention pursuant to Election Code Section 10010 to initiate procedures for establishing and implementing by-district elections for city council members, and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement to retain the services of National Demographics Corporation to assist with the transition to by-district elections. We have several speakers for this item.
Okay, so the city manager and I have been discussing how we want to present this. He has a PowerPoint that could. What?
This is district elections.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Sorry. Okay, staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, council members, Mayor Butt. On September 11th, 2019, the city received a demand letter from Attorney Scott Rafferty asserting that the city's at-large council member electoral system violated the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act. The letter threatened litigation if the city declined to voluntarily change to a district-based election system. The council is here tonight to consider adopting a resolution of intention to change to district-based elections, and I am here with our outside counsel, Michael Colantuno, to provide some additional background information on the Federal Voting Rights Act, the California Voting Rights Act, and district elections in general.
As many of you know, the Federal Voting Rights Act is one of the accomplishments of the civil rights movement of the 60s, and it requires that communities that elect their council members by district draw districts that will elect a person of color to office if they can, what are called majority-minority districts, a district that has a majority of the population members of racial minority groups. It does not require district elections, and it has not required this city to establish districts. The California Voting Rights Act is a much more recent statute. It's about 6 years old, and it effectively requires any community that has any diversity at all to go from electing their council members at large to electing their council members from districts. The test in the statute is whether or not there's evidence that voters in your community tend to vote for candidates like themselves and have had less success in achieving electoral office than would be statistically random. That test is very easy to prove, and no community of any type has ever succeeded in disproving that test. So this lawsuit produced demand letters for literally hundreds of local governments around California. Most local governments acceded to the request and converted to districts. And when they did so, they were hit with very substantial bills for legal fees for the lawyers who made the demands. When the local government community complained about how much money they were spending, the legislature amended the statute, and the amendment allows you to take what's called a safe harbor approach. When you receive a demand of this type, if you adopt a resolution indicating your intent to go to districts after a 90-day process involving 4 public hearings, and you in fact march that trail and adopt the districts, then the maximum attorney's fee award that can be provided to the plaintiff's lawyer is $30,000. Only 4 communities that I can think of have resisted demands to go to districts. The city of Palmdale litigated all the way to the California Supreme Court, arguing that as a charter city it should not have to comply. It lost. The city of Huntington Beach objected to this statute, and for reasons that are not clear to me, nobody has sued them yet, but the courthouse filing window is still open. The city of Huntington Park, which is a very small and almost entirely Mexican-American community, objected, saying if we go to districts we will have less representation of the Latino community rather than more. We're not doing it. Nobody has sued them. The city of Santa Monica most recently hired a very expensive and prominent legal defense team that you've seen on television, attempting to prove that their community had been successful in electing 2 Latinos to office over the last 15 years. They lost. They will go up on appeal, but my prediction is their legal bills will be a lot more than 30 grand, and they will not be successful. In light of that, a rather tilted legal standard that's designed to get as many districts on the map as possible, the city has these options. One is resist, likely lose, likely pay your own legal defense costs, and much more than $30,000 to the plaintiffs. Second is to adopt the resolution tonight and pursue this process to the finish line. The third option is to adopt this resolution tonight and see if you and your community are able to achieve consensus on districts within the 90 days, and if not, accept the fact that taking more time to do it will likely inflate the legal demand that you're going to get from the plaintiff's lawyers. So staff's recommendation is to adopt this resolution. If you fulfill the safe harbor process, what you're committing to do is have 2 public hearings at which you invite input on how districts should be drawn. Where are your communities of interests? Which neighborhoods should be matched with other neighborhoods within a district? And which districts could be comfortably placed in different districts? Then at your third hearing, you are to present maps. Where do those maps come from? First, we are recommending that you hire a demographer, a person who's in the business of drawing maps, to present options to you. Second, any member of the public who chooses to may draw maps and present them to you, and the demographer will make the data necessary to do that available on his website. And you may get a lot of interesting and creative proposals from people in your community. The plaintiff's lawyer has presented a map to you that he'd love you to adopt. I'm sure you will consider it. I doubt you will adopt it because there's a conversation to be had, not just with him, but with your community. You might be able to adopt maps at that third hearing. You'll probably require the fourth hearing to narrow down the list of maps to 2 or 3, then have a further hearing and adopt them. These maps will draw 6 council seats and presumably preserve the directly elected mayor that's called for by your charter. You will also be asked to designate 3 of those seats to be elected in about a year, and 3 of those seats to be elected in about 3 years. The council members' terms will not change in this process. So if you have a year left on your term, at the end of that year, you will either leave the council or run for office if there's a seat available to you where you live, or you could run for mayor. I assume the mayor seat's up in a year. I might be wrong on that. 2, got it. At the end of 3 years, the remaining at-large council members' terms will end, and they will have an opportunity to seek election in the seats where they live. So that's the process. The decision that you and your community are called on to make is how to draw districts and which 3 go in a year and which 3 go in 3 years. So again, that's the lay of the land. The staff recommendation and my recommendation based on the experience of cities who've gone down this path before you is you should adopt the resolution tonight and try to make it through that 90 days and see if you can achieve the consensus your community requires. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Did you have one?
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor Martinez and Bates.
Okay. You said that one case went to the Supreme Court and they lost?
The City of Palmdale argued that the legislature should not have the ability to impose districts on charter cities. And the Supreme Court didn't take the case, and the Court of Appeal published an opinion saying the legislature did have that power, that this is a matter of statewide concern and not a municipal affair.
Okay, so they basically said that charter cities have no rights when it comes to legislative decisions.
They do not have the power to resist this incursion into the design of their council.
Okay, what I'm hearing from you is that we're bound to have district elections. It's just our decision as to how much we want to pay for it. Is that correct?
That's right. The cheapest path is going to be $30,000 in legal fees for the plaintiff, about $30,000 in consulting fees to your demographer, and then staff time.
Okay, so I'm wondering why this city was chosen as a possible target by Mr. Rafferty.
I can't speak for Mr. Rafferty. What I'll tell you, though, is that there aren't any cities left in Southern California who haven't gotten this letter. So you were going to get this letter eventually, and your number finally came up.
Okay, would you surmise that our city council isn't white enough for Mr. Rafferty?
And the irony is that if you go to districts and communities like this, you may have the result of preserving white seats. Laws have ironic consequences.
Okay, so in a city like Richmond, where we have corporations like Chevron, who spent over $3 million on a particular election, wouldn't it be cheaper for them to pick enough city council members to own the city council by just choosing to put their money on enough candidates?
You're going to go from citywide elections to elections of about 15,000 residents, not 160, but 1/6 of 160.
So Chevron could
Sorry,
actually
104.
try to buy the election for much cheaper than they did when they did the at-large election. Is that correct?
The goal was to make it smaller, cheaper races, and they may well have the consequence you're identifying, council member.
Okay. So I once joked that when district elections came up before the city council, that someone mentioned that some of you will lose your seat, but I jokingly said that we could actually draw the line so that all of us could keep our seats. And, you know, would that be a possibility?
It is not, you know, it's very easy to say that incumbent protection is necessarily a bad idea. It should not be the only objective of this conversation. But the people did put you in office. And and respect for the choices of your community's votes in the last two elections is, in my view, a value. Moreover, you have among you meaningful institutional knowledge. And if all 7 of you left, and we got 7 freshmen up there, or freshwomen, there would be a consequence for the city's ability to lead itself for a time. So slowing the rate of change and preserving and respecting the choices of the voters is a legitimate consideration in this process. It's not the only consideration, but it shouldn't be swept aside as merely incumbent protection.
Okay, I did say that jokingly, but I said it to bring out, I said it to bring out the fact that there is a lot of jerry-rigging done at all election districting. So you can look at how districts were formed to sway the presidential election. You can look at how districts were formed to sway, you know, state elections. So it's possible to happen at the city level too.
No doubt, and Mayor Daley was very good at it. But in this case, you will have only 2 constraints. You must draw majority-minority districts if you can, and surely you can draw at least 2, possibly 3. So the Federal Voting Rights Act will require that those be drawn. Secondly, the districts have to have roughly equal population with no greater than 10% variance from the smallest to the largest. Those are the only constraints. Now, things like compactness, geographic contiguity, communities of concern, commonality of interest, those are good values, but it's up to you and your community how you reflect those values.
Okay, and one final comment. It seems that one lawyer's interest in money trumps a community's values, a community's choice. Is that how you see it?
This is a one-size-fits-all solution from Sacramento that's being imposed on your city and many others.
Thank you.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you for the information. I just want to inquire that most of us that have been in Richmond any length of time recognize that for the past some 30 years or thereabouts, Richmond has always been a diversified city. And if you look at the candidates or the council members over this period of time, it's a wide range. Does that not count for anything? In fact, that we have been diversified, probably the most diversified city in the state.
The sad fact, Mr. Bates, is the answer to that question is no. And the reason that the answer to that question is no is twofold. One is that the plaintiff's lawyer did his homework and presents the data to show that he can make a case that there's racially disparate voting in your community. Secondly, Santa Monica is somewhat different than this community, but has quite a fair amount of political diversity of its own, and ethnic diversity too, and they have had people of color on their council, and they have some folks of color on their council now, and they still lost after spending probably more than $1 million in legal fees.
So we're between a rock and a hard place. And so you're recommending that we proceed with a direction that initiate district elections?
And my sense is that you should certainly start down this path. If you find that you and your community can't complete this path, that's the judgment that's left to you. But you will pay a high price in attorney's fees if you make that choice.
So the only resolution is twofold. One is that we comply with the district election. Number two, we seek legislative assistance by communicating with our state legislators and the governor to provide a bill that would eliminate this requirement.
That's right. My sense is that that's not likely to be successful, but some sort of a exception for large charter cities that gives you more options might be saleable to the audience you would be selling this to.
What would that be as a charter city?
Well, for one example, if you had a rule that said charter cities of larger than 100,000 population may have at-large seats as well as district seats. So you could have a hybrid model here that would allow you to preserve some at-large seats. That might be saleable in the legislature, but a complete opt-out is probably not likely to be. There's a pretty strong commitment to this in the Democratic caucus of the legislature, and at the moment, that's where the votes are.
So you're suggesting that legally, if we proceed with a district election, we do not have the authority to include any at-large seats at all.
That's correct, and you may know that the City of Oakland used to have some at-large city council members, and they no longer do because of this statute. They're in the process of changing that. The law requires it.
Okay. Now, I thought, well, Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, obviously, that's a different.
Yeah, that is a little different.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for your information.
Any other questions? Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, the one example you mentioned that I found interesting was the predominantly Latino community. Do you remember, what city was that again?
It's Huntington Park. It's on the Long Beach Freeway in southeast LA County.
Okay, near Pete Ellis Dodge. Yeah. So that community, basically, it was not just that there were representatives of color, but that it was a homogeneously people of color.
Correct.
So that's what they have that we don't have.
Yeah, and it was, I think it's pretty clear if that community went to districts, they would end up with a white Republican and 4 Mexican-American Democrats, where they presently have 5 Mexican-American Democrats. Given the objective of this statute and who the plaintiff's lawyers are, that was not a favorable outcome, so of course they didn't get sued.
See, I'm kind of concerned about that because, in a sense, looking at this fine group of people, the only person here that would not be subject to district elections would be Mayor Butt. And he is different from most of the other people on this dais right now. So I would wonder if we would have more in common than with Huntington Park, but it sounds like your opinion is not so.
Huntington Park will lose if anybody chooses to sue them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question for you is anybody going to choose to sue you? I think we know the answer to that question because it came on 6 pages of lawyer's letterhead.
Motivation, yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Councilmember Willis?
Thank you. Assuming this route is taken, would this require a charter amendment to our charter, or what would happen with our charter?
The state law controls over your charter. You may choose to amend your charter with the assistance of your voters to make it consistent, but you have to comply with the statute whether your charter says so or not.
Okay, so so the charter just really wouldn't be an issue on this one.
That's
All
right.
Cool. Just wanted to get clear on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got an interesting view on this. You know, I'm supportive broadly of the idea of district elections. However, I'm not supportive of bending over backwards for ambulance chasers. But so you said something interesting earlier. You said that if we move to district elections, we could have 2 or 3, use the phrase majority minority. We don't use that phrase in Richmond, majority people of color, because that's what Richmond is. We're not minorities. But that there would be 2 or 3 majority people of color districts. That sounds like 3 less than what's represented right now. So all of that seems to support, and everything I've heard others say, seems to support the argument that if the purpose of district elections is diversity, this is not the way to do it in Richmond.
There are 2 ways to draw majority district people of color. The way that it's done in certain states in the American South with Republican legislatures is to put as many Democrats in that district as you can to make sure that all the surrounding districts have as few Democrats as possible.
Right.
The other way to do it is to get to 50% plus 1. You've satisfied your federal mandate, and you can distribute the other folks as you will. But if you can draw a majority people of color district, you must. And my sense is, your demographer will tell you, but my sense is you can draw 2, and maybe you can draw 3.
But what I'm saying is we should be able to draw 6, because there's 6 of us up here.
And you may end up there. And you may end up there.
But, okay, on a side note, of course I won't be up here. I'm not even running. Anyway, people are silly. On a side note, my view on district elections is kind of, Councilmember Martinez mentioned the cost going down. I actually think that's a good thing. I think the reason people like Chevron and RPA and building trades and all these groups have power is because in order to get elected, you have to find some way to raise $60,000 or more. So I actually think reducing the cost is why I'm actually open to this, and why I brought it up in the past as a way of making it so that someone could go out and actually talk to their neighbors and get elected. That said, this is a very interesting way of forcing us to do it, and I do very much am concerned about the backwardsness of much of this.
It's the law of unintended consequences. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Assuming that we go district election, who draws the boundaries?
The 6 of you do in consultation with your community. 7 of you.
So what people don't realize, there is not any area specifically that is designated for maybe 1 or 2 areas, but mostly this city is so diverse that you have African Americans, Latinos living all over the city, from Point Richmond all the way to El Sobrante Valley. And I don't know how you can draw a district to try to select either African American or Latino or whatever ethnicity, which don't seem to make sense.
There is a set of tools that are used to do this in compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. Your demographer is expert in this, and he will show you basically maps of your cities with each voter precinct as a color indicating the demographic mix there, and that will give you a sense of where the federally mandated districts must be drawn. Once the federal districts are drawn, the rest of the city is up to your local choices.
Well, I don't want to get into any racial, but if anyone is underrepresented on the council, it's the white community. So what you're doing is that while we have diversity, you're going to come forward with districts that are going to wipe out what this whole intent is trying to get more minorities on, Latino, African American, and Asian, I suspect. And the results are going to be less, which seem to be rather stupid if you want diversity. Right. And maybe need to, I don't know, challenges, I guess, collectively we can go back and challenge the whole process. Because I guarantee you, I won't guarantee you, but I would say that in the next 10 years, I suspect there will be hardly any African Americans because of our population is diminishing down to around 20-some%. The Latino population is increasing. So you're going to have predominantly Latino and Caucasian on this council. And that, I don't think, was what the law was intended to do.
One-size-fits-all solutions have unwelcome consequences for at least some communities.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a few clarifying questions because there have been some inquiries of whether or not citizens would be able to vote on whether we can go into district elections.
The law requires you to do it, whether the voters have approved it or not. In order to avoid paying a lot of money in legal fees, you need to do it in 90 days. We can't call an election in that time. So my legal advice is you should do this without consulting your voters. Having said that, once you adopt these districts and you've satisfied this and paid that man his $30,000 to go away, you could then revisit your districts. You could present alternative maps to your voters. You could present questions to your voters. So the dialogue doesn't stop once you're through this process. We've got to get through this process to send him away with only $30,000 of the community's money. Then what further dialogue makes sense to you and your community you can continue to have.
And as a follow-up question, because you mentioned in a very large amount in legal fees, do you have any estimate of how much it would cost for the city to fight such a case in court?
I can't imagine you'd get away with spending less than $500,000 between your lawyer and his lawyer.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you can call public speakers.
We have 15 speakers. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes. As I call your name, please come forward and occupy the seats directly behind the speaker's podium. The first group of speakers are Cordell Hindler, Ms. Dandy, Antoine Claude, Don Gosney, Cesar Cepeda, Kara Braxter, and David Drisdale.
Good evening, Mayor Budd, Council. So I'm going to get right to the point. My advice to you all is to listen to what the attorneys have to say, because I think they brought up some good points. So my recommendation to you all is to go ahead with have a public hearings. How many public hearings you want, that's up to you all. So with that, I'll give my time to Ms. Dandy.
Ms. Dandy? Antoine Claude?
Fact, Richmond has paid lawyers for years, millions of dollars of our money, and now you're going to go ahead and get shook up again. So I advise you to get that man that $30,000 and y'all go to district election, because if not, all y'all going to have to find y'all another seat anyway, because people are tired of paying for y'all mistakes. I'm tired of paying. When we going to get something back? Y'all get them people that man that $30,000 and go to district election so I can get in. Thank you very much.
Don Gosney?
Are you through yet? Thanks. You know, a little bit more than 100 years ago, Typhoid Mary carried a highly contagious and deadly disease that brought death and destruction everywhere she went. Today we have a couple of Typhoid Marys running up and down the state, bringing their own form of death and destruction to communities. The Schenkman team from Malibu and Attorney Scott J. Rafferty swoop into a community, and when they leave, aside from their pockets bulging from the loot stemming from their actions, they leave their own variation of death and destruction. According to Attorney Rafferty, because the people of Point Richmond and the Marina vote, they're diluting both the African American and Latino vote, preventing minorities from getting elected to the city council. Wow. Over the past 25 years, we've had 188 year-long terms on the city council, with an even 75% of the council members being minorities. Even now, looking at the council members sitting before us, I'm having a tough time seeing how we've been keeping the minorities down. We have to ignore the mayor since he is a separate office different from the council. When faced with the facts, I'm having a tough understanding why we need to segregate Richmond into black zones, brown zones, and white/Asian zones. Asians can't even get their own zone. Attorney Rafferty claims that we're keeping the minorities down, and he is stepping forward to be our savior. His kind of salvation, though, always comes with a price. Just for writing his boilerplate threat letter, he can demand and get $30,000. If we challenge him, he can demand that we pay his legal fees, even if we're victorious. Last year, when he hit up the local school district, he walked away with $318,000 taken directly out of our classrooms. To make things easier for us, he's kindly drafted maps for us to consider. If he's right about how racist voters are, we'll get 1 Latino, 2 blacks, and 3 whites on the council. If we look at where he comes from, Walnut Creek, where they do not elect by districts and have a solid 5 for 5 white people sitting on their council, maybe we can understand what his goals really are, aside from the hefty payday. As we listen to speakers tell us why we should elect council members based on districts, we need to focus on the fact that this is not a district election, so neighborhoods can be represented. If the Attorney Rafferty's position is of social justice, where we judge a person by the color of their skin. I wish he'd come before the council sooner so we'd have time to react to this.
Cesar Zepeda.
Vote for me. Okay, that was funny. My name is Cesar Zepeda, community leader in the City of Richmond, and as you all know, I've been a proponent of district elections for many years, so I've been out here with Council Member Myrick a few times around. But district elections is about accountability. It's about making sure that the people, wherever they live, that they're able to choose that person. I think if you look closely, and there was a 2014 election that got me more involved into district elections, because 2014 election showed certain people in one side of the city voting for a person, and that person never got elected. So while we might have the rainbow sitting in front of us and all great representation, but it's about what the people want. And if the people in a certain side of the city wanted a different person, that person never came up here. So again, 2014 election just really stuck with me. Back in 2014, when I first started being president of the Hilltop District Neighborhood Council, I asked several candidates and several of the sitting council members, when was the last time you have been to Hilltop? And a lot of them said over 10 years. And they were sitting council members back in 2014. And that was one of the questions that we asked, and it was recorded in the candidate forum back then at Hilltop Mall. So a lot of them didn't even know we had a lake up there. A lot of them didn't know the issues that were happening in that particular community. And I think the same is happening sometimes with a lot of council members not traveling all around the city. And it's a huge city. We don't expect you to go everywhere because it's so large. That is why we need someone that sits and lives in that area so they can see the potholes, they can see the trash, they can feel the issues that the communities have in those particular areas. So I hope that you do support it. You know, whether you go with the letter or not, your own map, whatever it may be, but I believe that district elections is the right way to go for the City of Richmond. Thank you.
Kara Braxton.
Good evening, council members, mayor, councilmen, and I do say men because I don't see any women up there. That's one of the reasons I do support district elections. Also, it's not about the color of the person, the race that is on the council. It's about accountability. If you live in that neighborhood, you live in that district, that person can call you and say, hey, like Cesar said, my street light's out. We need speed bumps. We need stop signs. If you're, there's certain parts in the city that people don't, council people don't even think about, they don't care to get votes from. So if everyone's held accountable, that's accountability. And there are more people that can run for a district than running for 7 seats. I mean, you really have more people running for city council than you will have running for 7 seats or 6 seats in the mayor. So that's why I believe in district elections, and maybe we can get some women back up in there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
David Drisdale.
What has Scott Rafferty done for this city? Nothing. He should not be making politics in our city. Maybe districts are correct, maybe they're not, but he shouldn't be making a decision for our city. And I think he's taking money from all of us to put in his pocket, and we should sue the hell out of him because his city is voting by large, like our city is right now, and it's all white. And we should sue the hell out of him for trying to make our city do something that he wants and not what we want. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Scott Rafferty. Will the following individuals please come forward? Joseph Pulio, Kathleen Weimer, Zach Ware, Ben Terrio, Charles Smith, Lisa Johnson, and Mike Parker. Scott Rafferty.
Well, to echo what the overwhelming majority of your constituents have said tonight, this is about accountability. It's not about the color of your skin. It's not about you at all. It's about the voters. And the voters in Belden Wood, our majority Latino neighborhood, have never elected anybody to anything, not in recent history. There have been times when a majority of this council has come from a neighborhood, from a single neighborhood, with 3% of the population. Now, it wasn't a 6-page form letter, it was a 32-page letter that gives you a lot of history about this town. But I'm telling you, every time an African American moves out of the inner city of Richmond and is replaced by a Latino, that Latino is less likely to be 18, less likely to be a citizen yet, and unfortunately less likely to vote even if they are. So this is not to have a majority people of color council is not necessarily sustainable at large. At large, this city does not represent every neighborhood. The people of minority neighborhoods are consistently underrepresented. And this is about changing that. One thing must be clear. This demand letter, this threat of litigation, my client could have taken the litigation on day one and can any day this week, because this is a federal claim. You've had your school district already say, we would be found to violate Section 2 if we went to court. It's the same population. So you cannot win that, and you cannot draw the lines any way you want to. You cannot draw the lines to protect you. You must draw the lines to comply with the federal law.
And I have some questions to ask also.
Mr. Rafferty, I just have two questions for you. First question, if this council were to decide to put district elections before the voter, which ironically is something I tried to do 4 years ago, but if this council were to decide to do that, could we count on you to not take any action while the public is deciding whether or not they want to go in this direction?
On the contrary. The last time that was done was in Little Rock, Arkansas. You don't have a vote on whether to comply with federal civil rights law.
So the answer is no. Your answer is no.
The answer is no.
Okay, so my second question is this. My second question is this. My understanding is you got about $300,000 out of our school district. They're in a deficit. My kid is in WCCUSD. A lot of our kids are at WCCUSD. That's $300,000 that could be going to programs. That's $300,000 that could be going to teachers. That's $300,000 that could be going to computers. That's $300,000 that could be going to all sorts of things for our kids. Would you just give that money back? Just, you could choose to do it.
I'll do better than that.
Yeah?
I'll tell you what actually happened. 4 days after I filed that lawsuit, I handed a map and a sequence to their attorney, and I said, I haven't spent the $30,000 yet. How about $20,000? And they said, hell no. And after a year and a half during which I had no income from that case, which took up most of my time, they got the same map, the same sequence,
so you're giving the money back?
Made almost as much money as I did.
So you're giving the money back?
I'm saying,
are you giving the money back? It's a yes or no question.
Excuse me, but this.
So you're not going to give the money back. So it's not about district elections. It's not about the public. It's about you. All right, cool. That's good.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I have a problem with this. Under the Brown Act, if you'd like to have a hearing, let's have a hearing. But if you're going to have people with 2 minutes, then let's not have.
Well, you get your 3 minutes, and council members get to ask you questions. You get to answer.
I don't think council members do get to ask the members of the public questions during public comment period.
So, if nobody else has any questions, we have.
I do have a
question for you.
Mr. Rafferty, I don't know if you heard my comments earlier where the diversity of this city over the past 30-some years that I've been around here has been quite impressive. Are you indicating that that's insufficient?
Yes, I am. Because during much of that period, the minority neighborhoods have not been represented. There's been nobody that walks the streets with them, that sees the potholes, that sees the crime. And there have been people who may share their ethnicity, but don't necessarily share their neighborhood, don't necessarily share their language, don't necessarily share their socioeconomic conditions.
Okay.
They have not been represented, sir.
So what you're saying, well, I won't put words in your mouth. The other question is that are you representing clients that are taking this position, or are you doing this on an individual basis?
I am representing clients, as I did in West Contra Costa.
Are those clients privileged information or what?
You will find them out if we go to court. I am not going to put people through the kind of intimidation that my clients in West Contra Costa.
So if you make an accusation and a legal position, is it not proper for you to divulge the clients that you're representing?
If we go to court, there will be individual clients.
Before you go to court.
I guess you'd like to know the Trump whistleblower's identity, too.
No, I didn't
So you
say
could
anything.
intimidate them and keep them out of court.
You're an intelligent attorney, I assume. Don't get arrogant and disrespectful. You know, I'm trying to be as respectful to you as and respect your position. And so I'm just asking a simple question. If you don't want to answer it, then just decline the answer. And the question I still ask is that are we not privileged to know who the plaintiffs are in a legal case against the city? And maybe I should ask our city attorney that question, being that you are not interested in responding. So that's all I have. Mr. City Attorney?
If and when a lawsuit gets filed, the identity of the plaintiffs will
Well,
become known.
I thought
There's
that
no
was-
obligation for the speaker and the attorney to give that
So I thought a
information
lawsuit
out.
had been filed. That's why
No,
we're
it's
here.
a threat of litigation.
Pardon?
It's a threat of litigation.
Oh, the threat of litigation. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Rafferty?
Yes,
Go
I have
ahead.
some questions.
Mr. Mayor, I have one, maybe two.
Yeah, considering that the 2020 census is not out yet, and that census will alter whatever lines we may draw between now and then, wouldn't it be cheaper for the city to wait until that census came out before we went to district?
No.
It would not be
several
cheaper?
reasons. It wouldn't be cheaper because every time you have a district election instead of an at-large election, you save half the cost of the election from now until the end of time. So that alone is going to take care of the economic issue. But the data is actually not affected. There is no citizenship question on the census. The only thing the census data will change is it will fine-tune the size of the districts. So it's not like you would, it will actually be more expensive to have the demography done in a post-census year. $30,000 that you're spending for your demographer now, you wouldn't be able to get that 2 years from now to do 5 hearings.
So you're saying that we wouldn't need to do a new demography with the new census?
You would only do new demography on the size of the district. But more importantly, because democracy is more important than money, more importantly, the legislature has been very clear on the importance of having the minority districts up in a presidential cycle. So the focus on 2020 is demanded by the fact that it's a presidential cycle. We don't want to have the minorities, this transition to occur in 2022, which will very likely be like 2014, which was some of the lowest voter turnout in the minority community ever.
I don't understand a single thing that you said, but I will say that you actually are making my job easier, because if you ask people from North Richmond, from Point Richmond, from Southside, from Santa Fe, from North and East, they will tell you that I've been there for them, and now I will only have to represent people from the Richmond Annex. So my accountability will be to a smaller group of people, and, you know...
So let's hold this to, let's keep this to questions and not, speeches. Okay, Councilmember Willis.
Thank you. This actually came up from one of the constituents, actually came up a couple times, so I'll pose the question to you. Why push to do district elections in Richmond when Walnut Creek doesn't even have district elections currently?
Two reasons. The first is, and I'm very surprised by this data, but it is true. I would like nothing more than, for example, Central San or my kids' high school district to be districted. I think they should be. But there are no high Latino, no high African American neighborhoods. The center of our county, from the other side of the tunnel to Concord, from San Ramon, well, from Alamo to Martinez, is astonishingly homogeneous. It's not all white, but it is homogeneous. This is not, Martinez is homogeneous. So I don't bring these actions where it's not consistent with the spirit of the law, which is to empower ethnic neighborhoods. There are no ethnic neighborhoods there, frankly. But on the other hand, Richmond is an extreme. You're almost the largest city left in California, one of the largest cities left in California that's not districted anyway, and you are a Section 2 because you have both majority African American and majority Latino districts, which is relatively rare in Northern California.
Okay. So just last question. You do, in fact, realize the perception that you're giving off when you're telling me right now that because there's not enough colored people in those areas, they don't need it, but because more people of color live here, you're coming in saying you guys need to be district, and you realize that's basically saying a white person telling people of color what to do with their politics in their city? You do,
If that's a question, sir?
Yeah, that is a question. You
Okay.
do realize that that's one of many perceptions that I have been feeling this entire time, and you just solidified that a little strongly now, because you said there's not enough people of color in those areas, but because there's a lot of people of color in Richmond, you're coming in telling us how to run our governmental system. Do you see how that kind of resembles colonialism in some kind of way?
Well, if you read the demand letter, and I hope you post it on the website so other people can read it.
Oh, everybody in here has read it, I'm sure.
You would know that at-large elections is not the original American way. It was something invented in California in 1910 to drive minorities, both Californios and African Americans, out of Los Angeles City Council and every other city council, and it spread like wildfire through the country. It was adopted in the South, and it has disenfranchised minorities. In 1975, when I was in college, I did all the statistical work for the Joint Center to show that the Voting Rights Act in that 10-year period had been one of the most effective pieces of legislation in our history in empowering the African-American community. And I said we need to extend that, and the Urban League and the Joint Center that I was working for, we need to extend that to language minorities, to Latinos, to California. So that's what I believe in. Okay. That's what I stood for. That's why I've done this. And I am proud of what I've done, of what my client accomplished for West Contra Costa, which has been transformed already by the accountability. And this city is so enriched, will be so enriched by a more equitable school district that is not run by 3 white people in El Cerrito like it has been for most of its 53 years. Okay. So this city is the same demographic, and it should have the same accountability to the same ethnic majority neighborhoods.
Okay, and actually, That didn't really answer my question, but I do appreciate the insight. There is one other question, because you did bring this up, and I actually don't know this information. So I know you said that elected representation in the Belding Woods neighborhood has been underrepresented. Have you done research on exactly how many candidates from the Belding Woods Neighborhood Council or from the Belding Woods neighborhood at all have actually run and actually even didn't intend to run?
As near as I can tell, and I've only gone back as far as, and it has to be based on the current addresses. People do move. But I tried to go back to 2000, and I can't find any candidates for anything from Belding Woods.
He moved.
Okay.
He was living in Belding Woods whenever he was put on the council. Yes. So because that. There's just a small problem I can get, you know, if people are underrepresented in the Belding Woods neighborhood. That's fair. That's a fair assessment. But I also have to ask how many people actually made the attempt or wanted to run in the Belding Woods neighborhood.
See, that though is the problem. That neighborhood is so politically demoralized and marginalized. They're afraid to go to the polls, they're afraid to register, and if we don't make this change and demonstrate that they deserve to be represented on this council, they are going to be afraid to be counted for the census, which is going to be bad for everyone.
And what information do you base that on? Because I'm a community organizer, if you didn't know, and I actually door knock in the Belding Woods neighborhood and let them know about that information, empowering people to get out to vote. But that's one thing that I haven't come across in my 8 years of organizing and door knocking, is people saying they're afraid to get out to vote. Unless they're already undocumented, then they're just afraid in general. But where did you get that information that people are afraid to turn out to the polls or get politically empowered? Because actually right now, the Belding Woods Neighborhood Council is meeting in the Cesar Chavez area, figuring out what to do with their neighborhood and engaging with council members. I'm just saying this is the political engaged part.
I can answer that question.
So where is this data coming from? Because I haven't heard it.
I got this data from the 4 days I spent at the California Latino School Board Association conference 2 weeks ago.
In Belding Woods?
People who, it's not just Belding Woods, although there were several school board members, Latino school board members from this county.
But were they from Belding Woods?
No,
just
we're
because
talking about the
Belding
Latino
Woods.
community generally, sir.
Okay.
We're
I was
saying
talking
that
about the Belding Woods
when your
neighborhood, but
is
yes.
undocumented, you don't necessarily, the Latino community is, as a practical matter, is not comfortable with being registered and counted. This is a serious problem for the City of Richmond. And I know it from my local clients, and I do have clients here.
Okay.
And I know it from the people who fought the campaign in West Contra Costa, and they filled the Latina Center. I speak from some authority on this, sir. These are the facts in the Latino community.
Okay. Is there any documents, final question, is there any documents or data you'd be able to share? Because actually, for us as current representatives on this council, if people in our community are feeling like they cannot engage in certain neighborhoods because of status, that is a serious concern we need to actually look at. So do you have any information you can provide this council so we can actually address that in our current term as this process moves along?
Sure. I mean, both the voter registration rates in Belding Wood, the voter participation rates in Belding Wood, and please, talk to the legislature. The legislature has a whole committee set up on the census. The issue of the fear of the community, including Latino citizens with undocumented members in their own family, is a very serious problem in terms of political participation and in terms of being counted for the census.
Okay, well, thank you for your insight. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'd like to move on. Everybody's had a chance to ask at least one, maybe two questions.
What, Asian guys are never going to get to speak from now on? Is that what we're getting here?
You want to? I'm sorry. There's so many people.
I guess I should sit with the whites.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
No, if you read the letter, it basically mentioned Asians on the first page, and then. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just need to speak every chance I get as an Asian guy.
Mr. Bates?
You talk about district representation. Every council member here, irrespective of where they live, get complaints and concerns and questions all over the city, beyond where we live. You're telling me that collectively that's inadequate. That just does not make sense. And the last question, I'll save the statement for later. But I don't buy your theory that we, because we don't live in an area, cannot represent the people who do live in that area. That's a bunch of hogwash, and I challenge you and anyone else, because I know personally, I work with Hilltop, I work with Carriage Hill, I work with every citizen neighborhood in this community. And I feel I've done it quite effectively in spite of what you have to say.
We have a long night ahead of us. I'd like to move on. Let's go back to speakers, Madam Clerk.
I actually only have one more question, and that is, when will you represent the Latinos in Monument in your city?
Monument is not in my city, but I represented the Latinos in Concord, okay. and I'm currently representing them in Mount Diablo Unified School District. And we have, in that case again, their demographer adopted or is now proposing the map that for that district that I drew. Okay. I'm very proud of that. That was, and if it matters to you, in Concord, I didn't get a dime because.
Could you promise us the same thing?
No, the reason I didn't was that somebody sent a form letter and it got there a day earlier. And they didn't seem to do anything, okay. But I spent 132 hours. I represented that community, and I'm proud to have done so.
Okay, thank you. Let's wrap this up and move on. Madam Clerk, let's call the next speaker, please.
Joseph Pulio.
Joe Pulio, Richmond resident. What's the point of grandstanding? This is going to happen, and I think we should take this as an opportunity rather than as a calamity, and make it a charter amendment, because there are problems with our charter. The staggered terms are designed for continuity, to prevent the will of the voters. We've had a clown on the city council with a 4-year term. It took 4 years to get rid of him. I think we should go over to 2-year elections of the entire city council. No more staggered terms. The U.S. House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, and it's been for hundreds of years. There's nothing wrong with a 2-year term. And the good part of the 2-year term is in 2 years, you can find out if a guy is okay, and in 2 years, you can kick him out if he's a bum. So take this as an opportunity, make it a charter amendment, and stop fighting over whether we're going to have district elections. We're going to have district elections. Thank you.
Kathleen Weimer.
Hello, Kathleen Weimer. I don't know if you're going to vote for this measure or not. I think a lot of persuasive arguments have been made by Councilmember Bates and others. But in terms of a procedural approach, I really get nervous whenever there is a rush to get a vote under the threat of a suit and having to pay lawyers lots of money. It reminds me of the mistakes we've made around Point Melodic. But also, if I were to have to vote on this measure, one thing I would want to know is the process through which National Demographics Corporation was selected. They're written right into the measure. As I read it, they stand to make from $60,000 to $80,000 minimum. They may be friends of the council here, but I would like to know that they were chosen through some kind of a competitive process. About districts, I don't think there's anything sacrosanct about 7, to tell you the truth. if we're going to go to districts and we're doing it for accountability and representation, we could have more. Also, let's see, there's also the point that elections should be held all simultaneously at once, so that because staggered elections do perpetuate the status quo and do retard, slow down innovation and change. And of course, the mayor should be elected at large at the same time as the entire council is, because somebody needs to campaign citywide behind a vision for the
Your time has
whole
expired,
city.
ma'am. Zach Ware?
All right. Good evening, Zach Ware. So I was really disturbed by Mr. Rafferty's presentation for many reasons, I'm sure. But I want to like at least focus on what I can share with you today. So out of my experience of running campaigns in city elections in Richmond, I have a lot of understanding of like what it takes to actually win a city council seat, what it actually takes to win a ballot initiative. And I'm in favor of district elections. I think it will make it way more accessible for regular people who are working a full-time job, who only have time to knock on doors on the weekend, who only have time to show up to community meetings after work at night. They will have the ability to earn the support of the 1,000 or 2,000 people that they would need in order to win a district election. And that really depends on how high the turnout is in a given district and also how many candidates are in a given district. But on average, you can look at the top vote getter, the winner in a given district election in Richmond, to earn between like 1,000 to like high water mark would be in the range of like maybe 3,000 votes or something like that. That's important. And I also want to address the concern about Chevron having the ability to just dump money into a few different districts and try to win those districts. I invite you to consider that in 2014. Yeah, they spent $3 million. They spent hundreds of dollars per vote. They didn't win any of the seats that they competed in. Spending more money in a district will not help them actually win those seats. There's just, the reality is people are ignoring political advertisements more than ever before. They listen to direct conversation and dialogue with you guys, you know, as the city council members and also as equal community members as we campaign for each other. So I just want you to consider those points as you make this decision. Thank you.
Ben Terrio?
Ben Terrio, President of the Richmond Police Officers Association and resident of the City of Richmond. Mr. Rafferty's already left. That shows how much he cares about. Where's he at? In the back? Oh, there you are. Guess he decided to hang out. Who is the Bay Area Voting Rights Initiative? Who is that? We don't know. That's a good thing to find out. Is that a real entity? To the question that was being asked about, you know, who are we representing? I think it was Mr. Bates. Who are those people? Is it a Richmond resident? Is this a real entity? If not, that's a problem. If we can't prove that up, then that needs to be denied outright. And I don't know what, you know, and that was a great presentation. I don't know how much research has been done into that, but that needs to be denied outright. Mr. Rafferty doesn't give a damn about this community, period. Period. He's here for the money. He doesn't care, and I can say that because, you know, whether it's a Brown Act violation or not, the Brown Act doesn't apply to me, so I'll say it for you. He does not give a damn about this community. It's about money. If this is what we have to do, because that's what they say the law is, whatever. But at minimally, that should be researched if it's a real entity, because if it's not, obviously he needs to pound sand. If it is, he needs to be given the most minimal amount of money possible, let the citizens decide, and that's it. And send these scumbag lawyers packing where they belong, back to Walnut Creek. Not here.
Charles Smith?
Good evening. My name is Charles Smith, and I think you guys are all kidding yourselves, but you're not kidding me because I've been around for a long time. This is about responsibility, and you people have none. What happened to the $35 million that disappeared and had to lay off 200 workers? You won the next election. How could that possibly happen? What about our famous lawyer who was fleecing poor black people with his phony lawyer firm? He won the next election after this was on the street. What about the police chief Brown with the Guap incident where he sent her down to Florida? You left her sit there. None of you lost your job. This is about responsibility, and you people don't claim any responsibility for anything that happens in this city, and you get reelected. Well, if you were in a situation where you had to win in one area, none of you would be up there. None of you. And one of you, by the way, ran for city council and claimed to live in the city of Richmond and didn't. No responsibility whatsoever. None. The Hacienda, one of the most shameful events in the city of Richmond. You all should have been, anybody sitting on this council should have been removed when that shocking incident came to the public's eye. But no, you're all still sitting here. We demand that there's some responsibility, and we'll never get it with at-large elections. This book here, The Second Gold Rush, is a history of politics in the East Bay. I'm going to read an excerpt from it. Page 18. After describing the surging political power of the working class population at this time, the author goes on to describe how the corporate business leaders responded, and I quote, "To counteract this threat."
Thank you. Your time has expired.
May I ask
You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. And anybody who knows the history of this city knows that. Yeah, it's a joke, isn't it?
May I ask you a question?
Lisa Johnson.
Good evening again, Mayor and council members. My name is Lisa Johnson. I sent you all an email earlier and asked the city clerk's office to pass it around, so you may have already received my comments. We need to recognize that what Mr. Rafferty has done is to provide a draft proposal and district map at this time. Based upon everything you've heard from legal counsel, it's incumbent upon us to seize this opportunity and get the best possible district map for all of Richmond. The West Contra Costa Unified School District ended up with a map that was not to their liking, in large part because they refused to really truly engage Mr. Rafferty. I recommend that the City Council appoint a district election committee comprised of 7 community members. 2 members must have an education in law, at least 1 member must have data analytical prowess, and at least 1 member who is well-versed in the history of Richmond. All 7 committee members must be Richmond residents, not currently be the mayor or serve on the council, not currently be a family member or close ally of the mayor or any council members, not be a member of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, have the capacity to be neutral, represent Richmond-wide demographics, have some level of education that will allow them to engage in sophisticated negotiation, because that is what this will require. This committee should be empowered to propose 3 to 4 district maps. They should be empowered to conduct 5 town hall meetings within the 90 days specified in the demand letter, and they should receive sufficient funding to support all 5 town hall meetings in different Richmond locations that are representative of this entire city. If the council chooses to move forward with this committee recommendation, and since time is of the essence, I would encourage this to happen within 14 days from today. Thank you very much for considering this recommendation.
Mike Parker.
Good evening. First, I'd like to make it clear that the Richmond Progressive Alliance has no position on this question. 15 years ago, it had a position favoring district elections. Since that time, it has taken no position on it, and there are people with both points of view in the RPA, very active in the RPA. I'm speaking only for myself, and I want to first of all raise some questions here that don't quite fit. My understanding, I did as much research as I could given the short notice that I had on this, but that the League of California Cities, in terms of their legal arguments on this, say that the question of what happens to a charter city faced with one of these lawsuits is not obvious, certain, or clear. That, in fact, that it may be that this has to go to a charter amendment, we have to go to a charter amendment, and it may be, before we even do anything else, and it may be that, therefore, we will fall into the category where we have to pay this man who's extorting us hundreds of thousands of dollars because that's the way the law is written. I don't know, but I call that to your attention. Secondly, I want to point out that the law that was passed, the California Voting Rights Act, does not protect neighborhoods. It's not about neighborhood representation. It's about protecting classes of people. That is, people of different races, women, people, lots of different things. More things than you can possibly imagine are in that law. But one thing it doesn't say is that any given neighborhood should have representation. So the question is, you look at this council here, and what does this boil down to? It's basically saying we have too many African Americans on the city council. And yes, if district elections were at one point, were used,
That was our last speaker.
Okay, Councilor Mark.
Well, as I said earlier, I'm conflicted on this. I have been supportive of district elections in the past. In fact, the last time we discussed this at the council, I put it forward as an issue to study, and it was for precisely the reason Zach Weir did an actually very good job of laying out. I do think that the way Richmond politics, and I noticed it the first time I ran in 2012, the way it's set up with basically having to reach tens of thousands of people to get your message out, means that you have to raise a lot of money, means you have to kiss some rings, means you have to get past some very powerful gatekeepers. And I'm hopeful that, if we're going to do district elections, that will solve that issue. That said, as I also have said, I'm really disgusted about the way this is going forward, and I really want to, I think we're going to go forward with something tonight. I think because I don't think we have a choice. So I think we are going to go forward with a version of declaring our intention to at least begin this process. But I really want to just directly ask, and I'd asked it earlier, to Mr. Rafferty, give that money back to our school district. Give that money back to our school district. They need it. But in the meantime, I am willing to make sure that we go forward and start the process of studying district elections.
Yeah, is that a motion?
I want to listen to the council first before I make a motion to see where my colleagues are at.
Councilmember Willis.
Yeah, let me just put it this way. There's two separate issues. There's whether or not we should have district elections, and then there's also this potential litigation, a lawsuit. The main thing that's always concerned me from district elections from day one is the fact that I actually feel like it is going to minimize representation. This is coming from somebody who's had to do a lot of door knocking through neighborhoods, organize a lot of people to speak up on their issues, and then meet with several council members, several legislators, several board of supervisors, and coming across this dialogue and this talking point that that's not what my constituents care about, and in fact my constituents worry about this. Growing up here in Richmond, there's already been a lot of divisiveness and a lot of separations where I've seen people get into it based on the apartment complex that they lived in or the streets that they were living on. And for me, separating and limiting representation of different areas and needs is not going to do anything to unify the city of Richmond. However, it will do more to separate the city of Richmond. I already got people talking about, oh, everybody over there in Point Richmond doesn't care about us every time they talk to me offline, or people in this area or the people in the hills don't care about us down here. And I don't know how this is going to encourage them to want to participate in the government structure if they feel like they only have one, maybe two people to listen to or be on their side. Now, that's just the district election piece. I can hear the arguments on the other side, definitely. I'm not going to ignore those. And, yeah, so that is just my high concern in general, is that council members won't feel as accountable to the rest of the community of Richmond, whereas in at-large elections, you have to be accountable to a large majority of people. Needless to say, not everybody represents that with the greatest finesse or anything like that. Implementation is always a hard time, but at least that mechanism is actually there to where you can call up all 7 of us right now and be able to know that you represented me, it's my vote that got you, and it's my participation. With district elections, you're limited to your district and the mayor. All the other ones, maybe you can plead to their hearts and interests based on your needs if you don't live in their district, but that is my concern. We're actually creating a barrier wall of public participation and a barrier wall of people that want to actually reach out. Now, agree or disagree, I'm just worried about that separation and segregation. Now, in terms of this letter, now I'm just going to re-say what I said. I really feel like, even if it's directly or indirectly, this just reminds me of colonialism, essentially. It's somebody that doesn't live in this community, that doesn't have any part of this community, any stake in the community. And unfortunately, when I ask where you're getting your information from, I got entities that were not nowhere near the community. It was always somebody offsite or representatives from multiple areas, but not actually the neighborhoods or the neighbors themselves. So that just concerns me in terms of the integrity of the statement. I mean, if you're just pushing to do district elections, just to do district elections, then just say that, but the integrity behind the statement and letters are coming out, I really highly question, and that's my main problem with that. If we are to do district elections, it needs to be an initiative that's initiated by the people in the city of Richmond, that's put before the council, put on the ballot, vote on it, and then let's take it from there. If that's how it's going to happen, that's how I believe it should happen. Not somebody holding a gun to our head, say, choose how you want to be shot. So, yeah, I am, feel like a rock and a hard place on this. I don't appreciate how any of this has come about. But that's my general concern about district elections, is I feel like it does limit representation. There is an argument to be said on the other end. I'm not going to deny that. But in terms of everybody you can be accountable to in that moment, you're limited to one person and the mayor, and maybe hope that somebody cares about your issue too if you aren't represented by them in the district. And that's where my concerns have been since day one. So those are just my comments on the issue so far.
Councilmember Bates.
Well, I share Councilman Willis's position and many of his arguments. I'm going to have to support this item on the basis of the legal representation's recommendation. But I think this is a grave decision that we're getting ready to embark upon, and it's going to have serious consequences down the road. And I say that having been on this council for 34 years, and I have seen certain council members get elected at large, but if they're elected as a district, their district is going to get 0 because of their attitude. 4 of us council members can get together, and we can protect each other, and we can make sure our district get the heart of the pie. And if there's 1 or 2 that we don't particularly care about, and we've had that situation on the council, that district gets 0. What we've done in the past is that wherever there was a need, irrespective of where it was located, if it's an emergency, we all concentrated and pull the resources to that particular area. And I guarantee you, if we got district elections, that's not going to happen. People are going to be protective of their own little germane, and that's the way it's going to be. It's almost like a family. I'm going to protect my family. I can care less about Brother Willis's family. I can care less about Brother Butt's family. I'm going to protect my territory and my family. And if I can get 3 other people that I can coalesce with, hey, I'll help you out. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And all of a sudden, other districts who don't have that so-called political muscle or ability to interject and work with a team, they get 0. If that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. But I'll tell you, at 88 years of age, I won't be around here to worry about it.
Councilmember Mark. Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, so I was elected by the City of Richmond, and I believe that I have done my best to represent the City of Richmond. I have been to all neighborhoods. I've talked to people in all neighborhoods. But if we go to district elections, whereas before we have, because we've been elected at large, we have represented the city at large, and we have voted our conscience on various issues. When we have district elections, I see a lot more horse trading on policies. As Councilmember Bates said, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And so we're going to end up with little coalitions who are scratching each other's backs to get their policies passed. And I will do my best to represent the entire city, but let it be known that my priorities will be whatever district elects me, if any district elects me. So I also realize that the City of Richmond may not want me, just as whatever district I'm a part of may not want me.
So it's pretty clear we all have misgivings about this, but is somebody going to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll begrudgingly make a motion to adopt the resolution.
Okay. Is there a second?
But let me ask real quick, because one of the speakers asked this, and I think it is a good question. Where does National Demographics Corporation come from? Why were they put in here?
I've worked with them in a number of cities, and you only have 90 days to get a lot of work done that I have to be able to stand on legally, and I trust them to do it. If we had more time, would I be happy to recommend an RFP process to you? Of course. But you don't have much time. We got to get this all done by January 20th.
All right. All right, so that's my motion, is to adopt the resolution and follow the process accordingly.
So a couple of comments I have. Yeah, there was a second.
Second by Councilmember
Choi.
Vice Mayor Choi.
So a couple of comments I have. As I said, we all have misgivings about this, but I don't think we have a lot of choice other than to support it. Personally, I feel like that at the end of it, we're all going to see a lot of unintended consequences. And then one thing that nobody else has brought up is that the most underrepresented class on this city council is the female gender. There are 51.6 females in Richmond. So according,
Out of 100.
Percent. What did I say?
So I think it's a little more than that.
51.6 percent female in the Richmond population, and yet none of them is represented up here. And I kind of look at this, and I look at some of the justification that's made here, like, okay, Building Woods or any other district, is 51%, some particular ethnic group, and therefore you're expecting that a person representing that community might be of that same ethnic group. And I think all you got to do is look at the gender and see how that logic falls apart. Because if that logic really worked, we'd see more women on this city council than we see men. And so anyway, with that in mind, let's vote.
We have a motion by Councilmember Myrick, a second by Vice Mayor Choi. The motion passes with Councilmember Martinez voting no and Councilmember Willis abstaining.
The reason I voted no is because I'm voting the fact that none of us want to be forced to do something. None of us want the right for decisions to be taken away from the people of Richmond. And I voted no basically because I'm saying I am Sparta.
Okay, Madam Clerk, let's move to the next item, please.